The 3,800 emojis at our disposal allow us to communicate nearly every situation life has to offer. But sadly, there's still no way to talk about our favorite brands with these cute little icons. So in this video, I'm turning your favorite brands into emojis to save your fingers the arduous task of typing out their names by hand. I'll be using the styles of various emojis throughout the ages, so this should be interesting. Up first, we've got the always fresh, never frozen girl, Wendy, from the Wendy's fast food restaurant chain, of course. Now, I did a realistic painting of Wendy in a previous video, which was a ton of work, but thankfully this time I'll be doing something much simpler by imbuing her face on one of Facebook Messenger's old emoji sets. Now, these are largely made with fun, blobby, squishy shapes, which I actually really like because they just have so much personality. Like every emoji set, they do have their own style of people, of course, but I just think it'd be more fun to make a Wendy's version of one of the standard smiley faces. So I'll just start with this happy little dude and then use him as a guide to paint a base for my new emoji. The original emojis are pretty low resolution, which is why I'm having to repaint my own. And the eyes here are honestly really good, so I think I'll just keep those the way they are. Really kind of the same situation for the mouth, since it already matches Wendy's happy expression. And you know, emojis are all about reusability, which is why they all look so similar. We just need to differentiate this one by pulling in some of Wendy's main characteristics. The biggest thing, of course, being her red hair. So I've grabbed these lips emojis from the set, which I'm going to use to select this red color from. And Wendy's hair basically has two sections. One that kind of flows off to the right, that comes down and flows around the back of her head. And of course, she's got that one little twig of hair popping out up front. Then we've got another clump of hair flowing off to the right, but this one's supposed to come down a little bit further, so I might just have it overlapping part of the eye here. Now, does it look like somebody ripped off part of Elmo's hide and stuck it on her head? Yes, it does. But all we've got to do to make this better is to separate some of these hair chunks with some shadow. The central divide here is really the most important part because it'll most help us distinguish those two big volumes of hair. We'll get some shading on this little twig as well. And in this set, basically all of the emojis have light coming from the right-hand side. So that means the left side of our hair will have a larger, darker area to help show that depth. Speaking of which, I need to real quickly add in the shading on the entire face. For some reason, they put this little dash of shading around all of their mouths. I'm not entirely sure why, because there's no way you'd be able to see it. Either way, now it's time to move on to the pigtails popping out the back of the head. And these are kind of made up of two different parts, one being this little bun, and the other is this little tip that kind of splits and furls out on the end. Of course, we've got that big bright blue bow tie that holds it all together. And you'll notice the shading is a lot more important in styles that don't utilize outlines, because it's really the only way to separate different shapes that have the same color. Now I can just duplicate that and drag it to the other side, maybe rotate it to better match the angle of the head, and then hide it a tad more behind the face. That way we get some sense of perspective, like the head is rotated in 3D. Just gotta touch up the shadows on that so it matches the lighting direction of our scene. The other characteristic that's kind of hard to miss on Wendy is her freckles, but we'll only get 3 on each side for that emoji style simplicity. But you know, a lot of times it's easier to differentiate between a man and a woman when you draw the eyes being open, but since these are closed, I'll throw in some bubbly eyelashes to make it more clear that she's a young girl. And with that, we've got a cute little Wendy's smiley face you can use the next time you want those crispy, deep fried chicken nuggets with a side of freshly butchered potatoes. And up next is Pokemon. Now we obviously can't turn a logo with all this text into an emoji, so why not just pick a notable Pokemon to use as a mascot? I mean, basically everybody on the planet knows who Pikachu is, but I think a better option might be Snorlax. Not only is he massive, and bigger is nearly always better, but he hates music from small woodwind instruments, plus he's round like a Pokeball, making him the perfect shape for an emoji. The style of our Snorlax emoji is going to be based on Microsoft's new emoji collection for their Fluent design system. They've got this really interesting 3D look, and it looks like they were even made with 3D tools so they could all be animated, which is pretty cool. Now, basically all of Microsoft's new emojis are either facing to the side or straight on, meaning our Snorlax body is going to be facing us directly, with a large, oversized head attached to give him kind of a cute chibi look. Then he's got a tan, poofy belly, kind of like a teddy bear or something, which actually goes all the way up to his face, and there's a little triangle shape cut out of the middle. For his cute little feet, I'll just make a couple of thick pancake shapes, with the 3D look kind of angled away from his body. And can't forget that dark sole of his foot pad. And a couple of small, smooth cones for his toenails. And now we need a big tube hanging off his side for an arm. He is technically supposed to have claws on his hands, but I think they'd run into the toenails too much, so I'm just gonna leave him out. Oh, and we can't forget his Batman-like ears jutting out of his head. His face is quite simple, with single lines for his eyes, a half moon for a mouth, which I'll round off the corner of, as round things look friendly. And then a couple of teeth that are dull enough they barely bite through a loaf of Jello. And while we're up here, why don't we go ahead and start doing some of that lighting to make this all look 3D. And you know, I have sometimes wondered how Snorlax always seems to sleep so heavily. Well, maybe he uses Oslo Sleep Buds, the sponsor of today's video. See, all Snorlax wants to do is nap the day away. But how can he with all the bike bells billowing, the flute players fluting, and the Psyducks sighing? Well, the Oslo Sleep Buds play scientifically based sleep sounds to mask out those pesky distractions. So our buddy Snorlax here can get a full 10 hours of rest, which is how long these buds last for. As you can see, they are super small, easily fit into your ear, and are super comfortable. So no matter what position you sleep in, like if you prefer to be on your belly, or lounge on your back, or roll to your side, they'll feel great every way. And with their handy charging case, our Pokemon friend here will get an additional 4 charges, so he can take multiple naps all across the city, getting in as many people's way as possible. See, the Sleep Buds can start out playing any audio source you like, whether it be YouTube or Netflix or Audible, whatever you need to help relax your mind. And then when they detect you've fallen asleep, they switch to sound masking mode to make sure you get a distraction-free sleep. You can even set a built-in alarm to gently wake you up without disturbing anyone around you. So if you want to get the best night's sleep of your life, scan the QR code on screen, click the link in my description, or use code BSD to get $10 off your pair of Oslo Sleep Buds. Now we just need to make his eyes look like little worms to match the other emoji styles, a little color adjustment to brighten him up, and lastly, all of Microsoft's new emojis have this really prominent purple underglow to them. I do actually kind of like it, so it just kind of helps unify the whole set and keeps the shady areas from looking overly dark. And now you can send your boss a quick, simple excuse for why you didn't show up to work today, and there's no way they can get mad at you. And up next we have Pringles. Here I've got the Pringle Man's original form before he was sent off to boot camp and lost all his hair. While I was scrolling through the big book of emojis, I found a very special set that I want to use for him. It's this tiny little set that was made by Google way back in the day for Gmail, and they nicknamed it Goomoji. Sounds appetizing, don't it? There were only 79 of these little critters, but thankfully they still left room for the poop emoji. So since I've already made a video about making a more complicated version of the Pringles Man, I thought this time I'd go in the opposite direction and squish him into a 15 by 15 pixel grid like these little guys. So I've got the grid set up right here, and I gotta be honest, I don't really have that much experience with pixel art. I mean, with such a small number of blocks, how much could I really mess it up? So if we look at one of the real Goomojis, you'll see that it has this really clear 1 pixel wide stroke all the way around it, giving it a really cartoony look. Luckily, our Pringles logo has a black outline for that same cartoony look, so this should be perfect. I'll just start out with the top of the head here, making sure to leave room above for the hair. And now when you're working with this few pixels, about the closest thing you're going to get to a circular arc shape is going to be a straight diagonal line. Now some pixel art styles do utilize anti-aliasing, which lets you use a lighter colored version of your outlines at key spots to make the shape feel more rounded from a distance. Goomoji does nothing of the sort though, so we're stuck with this little choppy egg. Looking at another one of the original set's characters, you can see that their eyes are made of these 2x2 grids, so I'll place some in here like so. But I do want to capture that little white spark of life in his eyes, so we'll erase out the top right corner of each. Looking back at this original set, you can see they use a really limited color palette. But if I want to do his hair next, I need some brown. So let's just color pick that. Now I can just start plotting the hair in, and it'll just kind of puff out on the side, flaring out into a small wave. On this side though, he's got this little twig of hair that folds down across his face, so I'll just need to paint that over top of the black outline, curling it around to give that effect. In a similar fashion, we can start working on the beard, which really just needs to be kind of fat at the bottom, and swirl out into some tiny twigs at the ends. Now from the flower Goomoji, I'll grab this red color, and here comes the bow tie. Granted, I don't really have enough room to make big diagonals, so this fat H shape is about all I can do. Now see, if you zoom out, you can start to see our little Pringle guy. But like the original logo, we are going to need some outlines around these other parts and not just his head. Getting it around the top of the hair is pretty easy because we've got plenty of room for all the pixels. But you can see if we start trying to put some of those around the bottom of the hair, it just kind of runs into this eye and makes it look really bad. So I'm going to have to leave those out. The bow tie is kind of a rough situation too because it barely has a shape already, but it does need some outlines. So maybe just shaving the shape down like this would help keep it structure. And then when we go into outline the mustache, all that kind of comes together. Most of these Goomojis do use some type of shading. So if we go back to our poo, I'll get this darker brown color that we can then use to start adding some dimension to some of these things like the mustache. A bit on the hair as well to really show those waves. Maybe a couple dots around the tie to form a knot in between the two bows. And maybe some highlights too, just in a couple spots to add some extra sheen to that distinguished hair. Lastly, I'll get a little blue here and paint a tiny shadow on the left side of the head just to give this whole thing some volume. And now finally, we have an easy way to tell our friends to only come over if they bring along the best tubed potato chips in existence. Moving on, we have Keebler and its little elf mascot, which if you aren't familiar, he's the leader of a pack of wild elves who live in a tree and make fudge-covered cookies night and day. Kind of like Oompa Loompas, but they're enslaved by one of their own. The style I'm going to be copying is Microsoft's emoji set from 2021. They've got these super distinct, simple designs with these decently thick black outlines. Honestly, this is one of my favorite sets, so I think the overcomplicated emojis are a little overhyped. Bruh. I mean, nobody can see all that detail anyway, so I think it's fitting if we use their elf as a base for our elf. I'll redraw the face real quick with some simple vector shapes, since the original is kind of low resolution. Vector objects are way easier to work with to make perfect shapes, which can often be really hard to produce if you're trying to paint them by hand. Just get that head in, and we're off on our own, ready to start painting his bright red hat. Now this hat is quite floppy, but still pointy on the ends, and here I painted just half the hat so I can duplicate it, flip it, and we can get a perfectly symmetrical shape. Now we can't make the floppy hood symmetrical, because then it'll just look like he's wearing a bonnet. But if we have that hood lean off to one side, then we'll get something a lot more useful. But you can see we do need some separation between the rim of the hat and the hood. Luckily, he's supposed to have a yellow band around his hat, which should help separate those parts. But this should technically be cut off here, because this part of the hat should be overlaying this back part. But with a little shadow, we can really make that separation much more apparent. That same concept can be used under the hood as well to give it a sense of depth. Now I found this finely dressed gentleman that should have the perfect hair for our elf. So I'll just use him as a guide to paint our elf's gray flowing hair, which, you know, now that I think about it, this dude's gotta have some pretty decent genes to have all of this hair and still be so old. I'll kind of tuck it in here on this side, poof it out on this one, and let's keep that little twig dangling down over his forehead. Now all these emojis are built like units, a super broad, sharp base with the rounded corners on top. It seems like all elves wear green for some reason, but this particular guy has a high-class suit with fancy lapels, a dashing red vest, and a very minimal yellow clip-on tie. Let's give him that big thick outline to match all the others in the set, and I'm thinking a couple of red rosy cheeks is either he's really happy, or maybe he's just red in the face from screaming at his servants all day. So whether you want a fresh cookie, or you've been abducted to work in the fudge mines for the rest of your life, now you have the perfect emoji for it. Recently, I found the strangest flavor suggestions the people of the internet had for popular products, and I made packaging designs for them. Watch this video if you'd like to see the interesting results of that.